Welcome to Planet Geo, the podcast where we talk about our amazing planet, how it works, and why it matters to you. Yes, please do.
Yes.
You lazy bum.
Yeah.
Oh, Christopher.
Yes.
How you feeling about this? It's a good time to be a geologist thing that we started. I mean, we started a while ago recording these things. How you feeling?
I feel good about it. I really do. Yes, I do. I absolutely do. I think about this a lot because I don't want to steer anyone wrong, and I have good relationships with my students and
past and former, or current and former. Yeah.
Current and former, and I have a lot of them that are, graduating right now, and they're shipping off to various universities throughout the country, and a lot of them are going into geoscience, and I'm excited about that.
So, Chris, we're at the time of recording, we're kind of have seniors decided on their college path. It's the springtime-ish, early spring, but they know where they're going. How many are going to geology places or geology degrees? Do you think of your current students that you have right now, who are seniors graduating?
I would say maybe almost 10.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's a lot. Where are they headed
It's a
off
lot.
to? Any Penn State?
All over the place. Nobody, I had, this, we talked about it. I had one student that got accepted to Penn State, but she can't afford to go.
Yeah. The out of state. Yeah.
The out-of-state tuition, that absolutely got her. So anyway, but all over the country. I have a student going to School of Mines in Colorado. I have one going to Colorado State. I have a couple students going to Montana State and Michigan Tech and Grand Valley, and so they're spread out all over the place. Kind of cool.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Going places.
Very cool. Going places, doing stuff. Exciting time for
it
them.
is.
And for you. This episode in our series is, I don't know what the title is going to be, but it's about, the origin of this idea. And this is not a new idea. There's a deep literature on this, but this struck me, this idea that geologists just think differently. That the geological training you get you don't need advanced degrees, just an undergrad geology degree trains people to think differently and uniquely compared to other sciences. That struck me actually a couple years ago when I was at a friend's wedding, and there was somebody else there who was a geologist, and so being the only two geologists at the wedding, we got into the mother of the bride was grabbed me and was like, "Oh, you're a geologist, I gotta go bring you to meet Uncle so-and-so." And so I met Uncle so-and-so, and turns out this guy runs some massive hedge fund or some financial entity that he started, but he's a geologist by training. And so we were kind of talking about this, and he's like, "I love hiring geologists. They just think differently." And I was like, "Oh, this is amazing." He got his undergrad degree, he got his master's in geology, went and worked in the oil patch in the North Sea, then went back to get an MBA at Stanford at the perfect time to get an MBA at Stanford, and got into Silicon Valley, venture and all that kind of stuff. And it did not do geology stuff anymore, but was like, "I love hiring geologists." And so that kind of always, that just stuck. It was one of those earworm things, like, "Oh, that's interesting." We talked about why. And he was just saying that geologists just think differently. And this idea has been mirrored by many of our alumni who go out into non-geology things, and many of them entrepreneurial, as we'll talk about in later episodes, but come back to this idea that geologists think differently, that the training trains you to think differently. And maybe there's some self-selection that people who think differently are kind of attracted to this field. But there's a couple. I'm curious on your take on that.
Okay, I have one. I think the title should be
Hot Takes with Chris Bulleyes.
Yeah,
this should be a weekly series in your classroom. Hot Takes with Mr. Bulleyes, where you kind of sit down, pull out the microphone, and give a hot take on something. I would love that.
That's a good idea. Well, I think the title should be "Do Geologists Think Differently?" Because I don't know, honestly, I don't know if I'm 100% sold. I don't know if it's our training that makes us the way we are, or whether it's just that the way we were born and we kind of like migrated to this direction because our mind is wired that way. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay,
I'm
so
not 100% convinced.
I agree with you completely that there could be a lot of, this is like nature versus nurture. There's a lot of, I'm not sure which one's which, because there might be a bunch of self-selection here that you kind of, people who have this kind of mindset are attracted to the field of geology. But I do think that the field of geology, Chris, you and I teach the intro college level, the first intro level class. I talk about a lot of these topics we're going to cover in a way that I know other sciences, their intro level classes don't touch on these really mind-bending themes that we kind of beat into students from the first class and keep talking about for all the other classes.
That's true. So I have two things that I want to say. First of all, we're going to approach this from, what makes geology, geoscience, study in geoscience different. And we're going to talk about scale. We're going to talk about deep time. We're going to talk about the complexity with some of the things that we have to tackle in the field. We deal with rich, very complicated data sets. And then our decision making is different as well. And we have to deal with, things are not black and white often in geoscience. And so we have to deal with this uncertainty and make decisions under that umbrella. And then we think, at least like, you're the first one that brought this to me. And I had never really thought about it this way, that we kind of think, humans tend to think discontinuously, but geoscientists think continuously. And we're going to talk about what we mean by that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're heading in this episode.
And this, Chris, I just want to preface this, that we're totally open to being wrong about this or having disagreement and continue. This is an evolving conversation. I think these are thought-provoking ideas these are not new, but we're going to frame them in a way that I think is important, because the geosciences, as we're talking about, are a really in-demand skill set and are going to be valuable to society, newly relevant to society in a way that they maybe haven't been for a generation or two. And I think this is a really important time to attract people who think along these lines, who are open to tackling, who want the challenge of tackling big societal problems in creative and new ways. And I think geoscience is a great way to do that if you like thinking along these lines, right? And so,
right. I'm sure you see this all the time too, but I have some students that are very intelligent. They're good at school, but they really struggle with geoscience as a topic, as a course, because they think black and white. They think in this very regimented kind of way. And it's an interesting thing that they really struggle with a lot of the things that we get into, not from a philosophical standpoint. It's just like they have a hard time processing this.
Yeah.
They cannot wrap their minds around it.
Chris, this is one of the great struggles for me, and I talk about it in the first lecture in class. I talk about it the second lecture. I talk about it almost every single day in class, and the students probably get sick of me talking about it because I get a lot of engineers who take my geoscience class for accreditation, and so a lot of it I say, listen, in geology, there are rules of thumb and rarely rules, because I cannot give you an equation that solves this world, this planet perfectly. And I think a lot of the things we're going to talk about here have to do with, okay, let's start going through this because this is a good time. The scale that we deal with. I'm going to turn to image number 1 here. Just an image. This is an image of the west coast of the United States. You can see Vancouver Island there. We're looking up the Cascades.
Love it.
It's amazing, right? The scale. This is the reason we chose this image, is because we are looking at a subduction zone system here, which we talk about in the intro level class. You probably talk about it in your 9th grade earth science class, the subduction zone, right?
Well, that's why we did the whole series on So You Think You Know Plate Tectonics.
That's exactly right.
I began the unit and a freshman rolled his eyes at me. He said, "Oh, I know everything about plate tectonics." Oh, wait, what? No, you don't.
What are you talking about?
No, you don't.
Yeah. This thing is thousands of kilometers long, and this is a small one, right? We're talking about tectonic plates moving across the surface of the earth and diving down into the mantle. The scale is enormous. And Chris, we cannot replicate. I think part of the difficulty and part of what makes geology unique, and this is not a new thought, People have talked about this before. It's a historical science. It's a descriptive science. We can't replicate in a lab. We cannot isolate an experiment that can replicate plate tectonics in the lab. We can't do it. We don't have the ability. We don't have the scale. We don't have the time to do it. We'll talk about that next. We just can't run a model and we can't do a control experiment, a control group, a testing group. We can't do hypothesis testing in like the classic, 7 steps of the scientific method or whatever gets taught, in the basic scientific methodology. We can't do that. And actually, it's too complicated for even our supercomputer simulations can't really simulate plate tectonics that well, even at a really fundamental level. Like the models are okay, but they're certainly not right. They're nowhere close to being right when it comes to the scale of the things that we deal with in geoscience.
You're absolutely right, Jesse. You think about the mechanisms for plate tectonics in any intro level textbook that you may dive into, you're going to see that the main mechanism for plate tectonics is convection. And there's something really wrong about that. It's like, I can't put my thumb on it. It's not the whole story. It's not even maybe most of the story. It just doesn't do it for me. And yeah, you're right. So,
and it's an interesting thing, okay, think about, how does the lithosphere break? We have tectonic plates with broken lithosphere all over the place. How does that happen? It doesn't happen spontaneously in models.
Right.
People have to, when you're making a model, you have to induce a weak zone and say, put a weak zone here and then it'll break. But so that's not a dig on people who do these geodynamic simulations. It's just it's the scale of the thing. It's the scale of the thing problem. So we end up being this historical science, which is descriptive. We look back, we collect data, and then we tell stories about that data. It's very hard to do hypothesis testing in the way that is outlined in your 7th grade science class that says, here's the 7 steps of the scientific method or whatever, right? So that is a strength, not a weakness, I think, sometimes. So
Jesse,
scale is one of the things.
All right. I don't know if you're going to latch on to what I'm saying here or not. You have no idea what I'm going to talk about.
Chris, that's not unique to this conversation, but yes.
That's true. Okay.
But I love when you start out with, Jesse, I got to say something here. It gets me, it perks me up. It gets me fired up.
Well, when you think about scale, how many times have you been in the mountains, like deep into the mountains, and you look up and you think you see your path, where you got to go, and then you get a little bit further down the road, a little bit further down the path, or a little bit further up the mountain, and everything changes.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, when I think about scale, I think of that too. When you're in the mountains and you look and something seems like it's so close, like you can just reach out and put your palm over it, and then you can't. It takes you an hour and a half to get there, and then it looks totally different when you do get there. The scale of geology and geoscience is I think of that too when I think of scale and wrapping your head around all of it.
It's the scale of the planet, which is a big thing. And it's a difficult thing. It's a complicated thing. I really like that. It's a good analogy. That mountain. I remember, anytime you drive out around big mountains out west, you're like, oh yeah, we'll just
we
be at
always
that
do
over
this
there. And then
when
you drive
we're
3
together.
hours and
Do you
you're
remember
like,
this?
Is that mountain any closer than when we talked about it 3 hours ago? No, it's not. Oh,
do you remember
crap.
with this?
Okay.
We were we were in my truck and we're driving into Colorado, and we put $5 in a pot, each of us. And we're like, how long do you think it's going to take us to get to that pass? 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. And none of us were right.
We were all off by like an order of magnitude about that. That was funny. Yeah. We're like way off. Yeah. Oh man. So yes, the scale is the first thing. And again, we start in on this intro level class. The other thing is time. And Chris, this image does not really convey time immediately, but these rocks are complicated rocks. There's billions of years in the formation age time difference between the three. You can see 3 or 4 rock units here. You can see this banded gneiss in the bottom.
Easy. Yep.
This pink one that's squished in the middle, and then a kind of a folded sediment-looking one.
Toothpastey.
Folding
Yes.
in there. Yeah, very
Love
toothpastey. There's billions of years of history time difference between these rocks, and they're all in one outcrop. And so that hurts. That still hurts my head. When I go
but it hurts
sit
it
on
in
an
such
old
a good
rock,
way, though. Like, I think you're giving that a negative connotation. I do not like that.
well, I do feel negative about it sometimes. I'll be honest. Like sometimes, like this is painful to try and think about. And
yeah, but there's
but
pain in a good way, and I think about deep time that way. Sometimes when you are, contemplating this and you get a hold of it, just, or at least the best we can, your mind grapples with this and it does turn your stomach a little bit, but I think it does it in all the right ways. I love that when I can touch it, like mentally, and it doesn't happen all the time.
I do agree with that. It's one of the pleasures of the job and of being a geologist at the same time as it can be frustrating at times. But the time involved, Chris, I mean, I don't know when was the first time you had trouble with the ages involved? Because I think for me, we often gloss over time, like the numbers, 1.0 billion years. Okay, sure, go move on. And then at some
trouble
point,
in what sense? Hold on. Are you talking like a religious standpoint? Or
no.
You say trouble, like what do you mean?
Just like a deep recognition, or trouble meaning like thinking, this is really hard to contemplate. Like I need to think about this more, or something along those lines is kind of what I mean by trouble. Being struck by it.
I don't know if I can put a finger on the first time that I had this, but I can say this though, that being at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, I had that.
Okay. Well, okay. One that stood out to you then. That's great. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's perfect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And sometimes, sitting out in a field in the Tetons, in the valley, and looking at Mount Moran and looking at, the Flathead sandstone sitting on top of the granitic gneiss. It's beautiful. And then you contemplate that. And it's,
I'm with you on that one, Chris. The time thing, it's more. I've definitely thought about it, and been worried about it sitting on some of the oldest rocks in the world, the Acosta Gneiss complex. But
it's such an interesting way to put this, Jesse. Sorry to interrupt you, but worried. What do you like? I mean, I don't know what you mean.
Trying to grasp what 4 billion years is. It's a hard thing to grasp. Makes the mind hurt. It's a spiritual. It takes a bit of guts to try and consider that. I think a little bit. You know what I mean? Or at least it does. And so, but it's more impactful for me, Chris. Not sitting there on a rock, a really boring gray gneiss, thinking, "Wow, this is really old." It's more impactful thinking like the Appalachians, standing on a ridge and looking out and thinking about the folded rocks that I'm standing on and when they were folded and then when they were deposited, 300 million years ago. It doesn't matter the numbers involved. It's just all of it's super old. All of it's kind of beyond the grasp of human record. It's like thinking about what does $1 million look like. I have no idea. I mean,
I know,
it's hard
I know.
to try and grasp what that is, right?
I try to do this. I try to come up with analogies or like comparisons, I should say, maybe. If you stack 1 billion quarters, how high is that stack? Or, you want to string 1 billion paper clips. How long is that string of paper clips together? I do this. I try to do this with me. It maybe helps me realize just you shouldn't throw around words like 1 billion flippantly, which we do all the time. And
was that a pointed comment at the younger generation, Chris?
That might be. Might be. Yeah.
That was funny. I do that. How many were there? I don't know, 1 billion of them. Oh, really? 1 billion? Okay. Yeah, sure. I'm sure there were, Jenny.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Oh,
so,
man,
but I do try to, I do things like that with my students and my own.
It's good exercise.
Contemplative exercise.
Well, so exactly.
Absolutely.
Okay, back to our point. You're doing this. You're pushing your high school students who are taking high school geology to think about deep time in this way, to actually think about it and actually try and visualize what that means. So again, geologists think differently from the outset. Again, I want to emphasize this. We start this really early on in the process. The other thing that we do is, okay, so we've gone through the scale of the thing. We're talking about tectonic plate movements. We're talking about time that's in millions, tens of millions, billions of years. We're also dealing with a lot of complexity. And the complexity here, Chris, this is an image from my fieldwork up in the Arctic coast. And this is a toothpaste rock, right? You walk across these things, and you and I have walked across glaciated, ice-scoured rocks before. We've also walked across, moss-covered, lichen-covered rocks where you can't see anything, and you're kind of like scrounging for a good outcrop. And every once in a while, Chris, most of my scientific life has been scrounging around scrounging around lichen-covered rocks, looking for a little window into the outcrop. And then we go up to places like the Arctic coast here, which they're all ice scoured. And you actually are like, ooh, I'm like, oh, cover that back up. I want to be able to ignore this complexity. Like, this is too complicated to think about. And this struck
it's a
me
nightmare. It is.
in high school on your exercise on Lake Superior.
That's right. Yeah.
Where looking back, it's not that complicated of an exercise. Like, you can work through this stuff, but it strikes you as like, oh, I'm seeing too much here. It's laid bare. I can't
but you're
deal
right.
with this much complexity.
Think about that, Jesse. You got 18-year-old kids on an outcrop on a beach on Lake Superior. There are probably 10 to 12 different things going on there, all different ages. That's a lot. That's a lot of stuff. And it's big.
It's a lot to work out. And that's actually one of the simpler outcrops you'll find in the world. I mean, it's not that simple, but it's my point.
Well, I wouldn't take them here, Jesse. Like,
no,
gosh, you do that, everyone would run kicking and screaming.
I know you. Well, nobody's figured this out. This is going to take a couple PhD students worth of time to even start to scratch the surface of figuring out what's gone on up here, right? And so this is, and again, Chris, you're showing your students something complicated like that in high school. In geoscience. And then when we're doing research, PhD student of mine and two, professors, we're going up here and banging around looking at these rocks. And we're like, wow, this is really, really complicated. And it takes a lot of effort to work out the geological story here. But that's part, again, of this complication it doesn't diminish when you look closer. It actually sometimes gets worse when you look closer. Like I
100% agree with that. Yeah.
My PhD students just got zircons out of these rocks here, and we're looking at images of the zircons. These zircons are incredibly complicated. One mineral grain, there's a bunch of different growth zones, there's bright rims, there's altered domains inside of it. So even when you zoom in really detailed, it's still really complicated. And this complexity requires a nimble mind, or it trains you to think nimbly, to kind of come up with hypotheses and chuck them away really quickly. Come up with a new hypothesis, throw it away really quickly. And, we've talked about this with your field camp experience, right? Like, you end up being like, I don't know where to go, come up with some theory about the next outcrop, and come up with a really simple theory so that you can throw it away really quickly when you look at the next outcrop, right? And then come up with a new theory. And I think that trains...
I think that this requires also is taking the big and making it small.
Yeah, that's true. That's a really good point. And taking the complicated and making it simple. We have to simplify it down because we just can't deal with the complexity. And I know there are other scientific fields that do this too. There's no doubt there's other scientific fields that do this, of course. But I think this is maybe unique in that it happens right away. We kind of throw this complexity at students pretty quickly. This is a complicated system with a bunch of different stuff going on. So that's number 3 is complexity. Another one, Chris, rich data.
Rich data.
Rich
data sets. Everybody loves data.
We love data.
Except teenagers today. They do not like
not like data.
They do not like data.
What was the exercise you were going to put together?
Oh, I know
it was phase diagrams. Yeah.
I'm gonna do that next year. Here's the deal. I am running I'm out of time. Yeah. We take our exam through GVSU in 2 weeks, and I'm not done. I'm not. So I just have to get through stuff right now and make sure that they are ready and know what they're doing. But next year I'm beginning with phase diagrams. I'm going to incorporate that into my labs. Absolutely.
Okay. Nice.
I'm going to do it. I believe in it.
What do you think, or why? I don't know how to ask this question. why do they struggle more with data now? Or why do they avoid data more than, let's say, my generation? What led you to make that comment?
Boy, I think that's a loaded question.
Okay.
But I think they're not any less intelligent or any. I'm not ripping on. I
no,
love
of course
them.
not.
They're amazing, but I don't think that they have to deal with it. Everything is very visual. It's right at their fingertips. They can get. I think it comes down to that they're not exposed to it nearly as often. Like, hey, here's a data set. Interpret this. What does this mean?
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Okay.
For whatever reason, I don't know what that reason is, but I think it's a lot like math in terms of my math background. When I was a kid, we had to do everything old school, of course. But that means
Chris,
that I have a
fundamental.
you're dang right. But I do have a fundamental. My background is based in. I had to do it, and kids nowadays, they do it differently, and I don't think that they understand it as well.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there's a visualization aspect too. Maybe that is required for data. So this is
I think you're just
modeling.
showing off with this data set right here. This
is not my data. This is not my data set at all. But this is just something that geoscientists deal with. I mean, this is drill hole data. So these are, this is just a resource model for some deposit somewhere, but it's just like you can see the little drill hole, the little straws sticking into the ground where there's like, I don't know if it's gold concentrations or copper concentrations or something on here. But this is just showing one aspect of a deposit. You can map, when we get drill hole data, we get mineralogy, we get alteration type, we get elemental chemistry, but not just for one element. When we get a rock, we measure the chemistry of a rock. We get 10 major elements, and we probably get anywhere between 20 and 50 trace elements in there, and all that from one sample. Every sample, we get that much data. And so we're dealing with this complicated multidimensional data, and that's just geochemistry. Think about seismic data, Chris. These seismometers collect movement in 3 axes all the time, and are collecting massive amounts of movement. And you got a bunch of seismometers put out there collecting data from not just one event, but a whole bunch of different events. We are a data-rich field, and that's a good thing because, again, we're doing this kind of storytelling. We can't really model the Earth, and so we can't do really controlled experiments on the Earth. And so it's good that it's data-rich. But it also means and this is one thing that I try and do in my research group, whether you're an undergrad researcher or getting a PhD in my research group, we try and get into really complicated data because I think once you can learn how to visualize and manipulate and think about complicated data, then you can just do that over and over. Like, then there's no limits to what you can kind of think about or what kind of data you can tackle. And it for me personally, it took me till the later stages of my PhD where I was actually able to really do that well. To my detriment, I should have learned it earlier. I should have gotten comfortable with it earlier, and I just didn't. So it took me a long time to get to that stage.
It's I don't know, like an analogy, but I remember climbing Devil's Tower, and I couldn't find the handhold. Just like I couldn't find it, and I'm standing on a little flake. My toe is just on this, little flake of rock, and my calves are starting to quiver. And, I'm like, I can't stay here much longer. And the move was in front of me the whole time. I needed to look at it just a little bit longer. And data's that way. You just need to, be patient with the data. You have to stare at it, and it begins to form. It just begins to make sense.
I have 2 questions. I have actually one question for you, Chris, but first a comment. That is exactly right. You just have to stare at it longer. I remember during my PhD, the moment it kind of clicked for me was I had a bunch of trace element and major and trace element geochemistry from rocks that I'd collected in the Icosian complex, and they were spanning 500, 600 million years of history, so a bunch of different ages, a bunch of different chemistry. And I just started making plots like X versus Y, silica versus vanadium. Doesn't matter which elements, I would just make plots. And then I found one that was there was an amazing correlation. It was like super really well correlated, and I didn't really know why. So it's like, oh, this is really interesting. So I started thinking about it, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. There's like tungsten is correlated to, I don't know, something else. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it turns out so it's tungsten versus something else, just in concentration. And I was just like, oh, this is really interesting. Okay, cool. Something I can dig my teeth into a little bit. And it turns out that it's just a contamination thing. So we crushed all the rocks in tungsten carbide thing. And this is very common that, like, if you crush it in a mill, you get a little bit more tantalum and tungsten because they're highly correlated because you just crushed them in this mill. But it took me a while to figure that out. But then I was like, oh, wait. That's how I do it. That's how I find real geological correlations. It's just like plot it, think about it, plot it, think about it. And so onto my question, what we do now in my research group is a lot of coding. I mean, not really coding, but we do high level coding.
You have a question coming my way out of this?
I do.
Out of all this mess?
How much coding happens at the high school level? And
it depends. Some of them do a fair amount. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's AP computer science and
okay.
These kids are incredible.
End? Like to what end? Like what do they do?
Whatever.
With it?
That's such a broad spectrum of, to what end they do. I mean, some of these young students are just absolutely incredible and do incredible things at that level. Yeah.
Do you do any data manipulation type stuff and have them manipulate the data? Or plot, give them data, plot it, and or not, or do you kind of give them ready-made plots of data?
No, I do this with geochronology. Actually, it's an activity that I wrote, but they have to do an isochron plot.
Oh, okay,
and normalize the data and figure out how much initial daughter isotope was present in my fictitious sample.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
But they have to walk it back and tell me. Yeah, they have. They absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I did that. I wrote that, and that's I'm proud of that. Like, it was so creative. Well, to me, it was creative. I'm not. The most
absolutely.
Guy, but,
no, to make them do something like that, absolutely. But it's good that they get their hands dirty with it, because to me, I didn't learn anything until I had to get my hands dirty with it, you know what I mean?
But that's the interesting thing is that if you throw them 10 minutes at this and they're like, Mr. Boyce, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm like, well, you haven't stared at the data long enough. You haven't, so I'm very hands off. I'm like, don't talk to me right now. Like, just do your thing. Right. And they have 70 minutes to do this. And by the time it's all said and done, they've worked it out. And it's a really good exercise from that standpoint. Just be persistent. Geoscientists requires just flat out dogmatic persistence.
Chris, you get the Segway award, man. This is a good segue into the fifth trait, or the fifth thing that I think makes geologists, or helps geologists think differently, is decision making under the face of, I'll show this image again, massive complexity. And I think, Chris, you just said it, it takes so much persistence, and it takes just doing something. Like this decision making thing, we showed this image to not really, this is not really a complicated decision, but it just shows what I'm talking about. This was a, I don't know, $40,000 field excursion up to the Arctic coast. We landed up here. We had clear weather day.
Gosh, Jesse, I think I know where you're going with this.
What
do you take?
What do you take?
Take
exactly.
Stuff back to the lab.
And we can only take maybe a couple buckets of rocks. We have a limited amount of time in the outcrop. We're never coming back here. Probably that's the assumption you work on. I'm never walking across these outcrops again. We spent so much money getting up here. We have this one grant. This is his PhD thesis. We have to get good samples for his thesis. What do you take? You can't take all of it, right? And you got to make that decision pretty quickly, because you only got a couple hours. And it's also we landed here, and you also have to make the decision of where do I go first? Do I go right, left, or in? Right?
I would do cartwheels on the rock.
Of course, at some point you have to be okay, we have to stop posing in front of these beautiful rocks. But what samples do you take, right? I mean, and it's a bit of a silly thing, but I actually kind of mean it too. It's not an easy question, but you just have to make a decision. You just have to do something. You can't get frozen by indecision here. You just have to start grabbing samples. And I think that's really a valuable skill set. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, Chris, but I think that's a really valuable skill set that, again, we kind of, it goes to like, what outcrops do you look at? You give these students this complicated exercise on the shores of Lake Superior where we get 12 events, and you just kind of say, here's the different things, go, figure it out. Students have to decide, where do they go look? Do they stand right there? Or probably not. They walk somewhere. But where do you walk? Where do you figure it out? Like, those little decisions, you just have to start doing something. And I think that's a really valuable skill set.
My take on it is a lot different, actually. It's, we have geoscientists and geologic engineers that are doing, they're mining. And they're taking stuff out of the earth, and that can be a dirty process. It can, all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of uncertainty in that, and my mind goes there, I guess, is what I'm saying. Is that they're making decisions under a lot of pressure. You have pressure, actually, because you have financial pressures. You have pressure to not make a mistake, to not go the wrong direction, or to not make it dirty, and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. There's just so much going on with that, which is why it's so important to me, Jesse, that this is a part of my job that I don't take lightly. When these are things that we need to do, we need these resources and so on, but you want to put the best people in those positions, those important positions, and so that's a part of my job that I take seriously, is that these are young minds or young people that are turned on to geology, and they're going to go out and do important things.
Right. And I think, Chris, it brings to mind one of my undergrad professors worked in oil and gas for a little bit before becoming a professor. And I remember saying that, you're making, I forget what the numbers were, let's say $5 million to drill a hole. And, the chance of success, or the superstars
10%,
were 10%.
Yeah.
1 in 10 was the superstars of picking the hole, right? And so, that's worse than baseball. That's like really low chance of success. And so but you have to make decisions. You have to drill holes in the ground to find more. And I think you're right. Like, we need decision makers, but we also can't expect perfection, because when you are making decisions up here, we were collecting these samples, we had half a day. We did not collect the perfect sample set, but we got a good enough sample set and a pretty good sample set, right? So I think that is part of the process, is like, it's not going to be perfect, but you just have to start doing stuff and making decisions. I think geologists, geoscientists, again, we kind of start training that from an early age. So, Chris, if we could move to this continuous, discontinuous mind thing to kind of wrap up this episode, because I think this really framed it to me really well. And this discontinuous mind, this comes from a Richard Dawkins essay. And the title is The Tyranny of the Discontinuous Mind. And basically the idea is that humans, to Dawkins' thinking, humans evolved, but humans are naturally inclined to think discontinuously, to think in binaries, like on, off, yes, no. The savannah, you get up and run, or you stay and fight. There's two options, right? You set up camp here or you don't, yes or no. And I think, to me, Chris, this is something that came out of I was listening to a podcast episode about this too. That was basically, the idea was we should teach, instead of teaching calculus in high school for AP calculus or AP, college math, should not be calculus. It should be statistics. Like, we really need to understand probability and risk a lot better in our lives. Kind of similarly to this concept, like the human mind, we want to know yes or no. Is the water safe or unsafe? When really it's a spectrum, right? And we want yes or no answers. We want high or low. We want safe or unsafe. And this Richard Dawkins essay was kind of highlighting that and all the societal problems with that. But I think all of these things we've talked about makes the geological mind is much more continuous. We are comfortable in this broad range of possible outcomes with different risks and different uncertainties associated with them because of all the things we've kind of talked about. Like, we're okay with uncertainty. We're okay with imperfection. At least more okay. I wouldn't say naturally.
Yeah,
okay.
but
like,
you know what, Jesse? This makes us the outcasts of the scientific community.
in a bit in a way. Yeah, exactly right. Chris, what scientific discipline do you think is most similar in this? Because I almost feel like economists are kind of similar to geologists. Like the economy is such this big, complicated organism. There's a quote by I think Richard Feynman that said something about the economy is really complicated. Just imagine trying to do physics if electrons had feelings. And I was like, oh, that's a really good quote.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. What do you think is similar or most similar or most different? I'm not sure which way to go on that one. And we'll ignore biology because that's just the stuff that grows on our rocks.
I think for sure physics, especially theoretical physics. You get into astrophysics, and I think it's very similar. One.
I think you're right. The astronomers deal with very similar. The scale they're dealing with, the complexity, the fact that it's a lot of observables, very few reliable models. I think that's quite similar in many ways. So yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and we got to get our friend Jackie Faraday on the podcast again and talk to her about. I just saw this thing, a news article. When was it? It's something about brown dwarfs, and it made me think of Jackie because she's like a brown, the brown dwarf expert. So
yeah, they just spotted a rogue planet.
Yeah, that was it. It was a planet with two brown dwarf stars. It was like a Tatooine like planet. That was that's right. That's the one I was seeing. Yeah,
I know.
It made me think of Jackie.
Jesse.
We gotta get Jackie back on the podcast. Speaking of astronomers, speaking of continuous minds, Jackie's a continuous mind. That's for sure.
She is for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Chris, that's kind of a wrap for these ideas.
I think so. So we need to end on this. I think. Do geoscientists actually think differently? I still. So. I think talking through all this stuff that maybe I talked myself into thinking that we'd actually do. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. If you have a thought, hit us up.
Yeah,
Send
hit us
email,
up. Absolutely. Please hit us up.
Yep.
This is not a like we're better than everybody else because we think differently. This is just an observation. Just an observation, and everybody's, it's going to take all kinds, to solve some of the problems we have facing our societies. And I don't think the geological mind should be discounted, but it certainly shouldn't be propped up above, other ways of thinking. It's just an observation about what might make geoscientists unique. And valuable.
It might be propped
forward.
up above the biologists.
Just a little bit above the biologists, at least. But, but they're at the bottom.
Our dads need
to
they need to get taken down a peg.
The scum that just sits on top of the rocks.
Right on.
Did I tell you I had a student who in the reviews in my the yearly the end of semester reviews or something left a comment that was like, I mean, I don't know why Professor Reming's so mad about biology. It's kind of weird. Because I kept making a bunch of jokes at the expense of biologists.
If he would have showed up every day, he would have known.
I know.
I'm sure you incorporated in that you have a dad that's a biology.
Yeah, of course I did.
Yeah.
But at first, the first day class, I was like, all right, what are everybody's majors? A bunch of engineers, a bunch of civil engineers, but a few going to be geologists, some biologists, etc. So the biologists raised their hand, and I started going into biology throughout the semester. But anyway, I thought that was
kind of weird. Yeah.
I don't know why Dr. Remick has such a problem with biology. It's a little weird. I thought that was good.
That's good stuff.
Man. Anyway. All right, Chris. Hey, that's a wrap. You can follow us on all social medias. We're at Plant Geocast. Download our CampGeo mobile app. First link in your show notes. You can get a continuous mind on the CampGeo mobile app. Just listening to all of our content we have there, visual podcast series. You can leave us a like, review, comment, subscribe, follow us on YouTube or Spotify, and shoot us an email. We have a contact us link on our website, plantgeocast.com.
Cheers.
Peace.